cascade of golden sunlight bathed the grand courtyard, glinting off crystal chandeliers and the polished marble path as dozens of the city's elite gathered in designer gowns and custom-tailored tuxedos, murmuring about the extravagant affair hailed as the wedding of the decade. Beneath the polite laughter and clinking glasses, a whisper of unease lingered in the air, something no one could quite name. Everyone knew the groom, Alexander Whitman, a billionaire infamous for his relentless ambition, but there were hushed rumors about how hastily he was rushing into this marriage. Those whispers, however, were about to be drowned out by a revelation so explosive that it would splinter hearts and tear open secrets once buried deep. Alexander Whitman was a man convinced that every problem had a price. At 38, his sprawling fortune stretched across continents: boutique resorts in Santorini, a string of tech companies in Austin, shipping fleets that cut through the ports of Southeast Asia. Born and raised in a plush Chicago brownstone, Alexander had watched his father, Richard Whitman, transform a modest real estate venture into an empire through sheer ruthlessness and iron discipline. Yet beneath all the cold calculation, a quiet restlessness often crawled beneath Alexander's perfect suits and polished smile. A flicker of doubt that money might not be enough to silence every ghost he had created. Now, with his father gone and the Whitman dynasty resting squarely on his shoulders, Alexander lived in a swirl of boardrooms, buyouts, and glitzy charity galas. The gleam of his success was rivaled only by the shadows of the secrets he kept. Though he was still legally married to Serena Whitman, a reserved yet fiercely resolute woman known for her quiet poise and old money charm, today he stood at the altar with another woman, Bianca LeClaire. Bianca LeClaire was impossible to forget. Tall, striking, with obsidian hair and eyes so sharply blue they seemed to pierce straight through a person. She had made her mark in the fashion world with a line of haute couture gowns, but was just as renowned for her calculating mind as for her striking looks. Behind her sultry smile lay an unyielding hunger that matched Alexander's own, a hunger that had drawn them together and made them reckless. Her affair with Alexander had sparked a year ago, though society gossips had whispered about it long before that. The moment Bianca had stepped into Chicago's upper circles, she had singled out Alexander as her gateway to every luxury she'd ever coveted. To Bianca, life was a chessboard, and Alexander was the king she intended to capture. The Whitman family's inner circle had done their best to look away from the scandal brewing behind closed doors. But it was impossible to ignore that Serena had vanished from charity luncheons and high society fundraisers for months. Behind velvet curtains, people speculated. Had Serena truly abandoned Alexander? Why was he so desperate to wed Bianca when there was no final divorce in sight? Some whispered that Serena had fled to Europe to escape public humiliation. Others claimed she was unwell. But Alexander never spoke of it. He simply pressed forward, determined to crown Bianca his bride. Why was Alexander so desperate to marry Bianca without a finalized divorce in place? Some whispered that Serena had vanished to Europe to escape disgrace. Others claimed she had fallen ill. Alexander himself refused to address any rumor, pressing on with the ceremony as if nothing could tarnish this day. The venue was the Whitman estate in Lake Forest, Illinois, a sprawling property renowned for its manicured gardens, shimmering reflecting pools, and sculptures commissioned from some of the most celebrated modern artists. Everywhere guests turned, white roses and hydrangeas bloomed, a tribute to Bianca's meticulously curated taste. Inside the grand ballroom, chandeliers imported from Venice sparkled above tables set for the extravagant reception to follow. The guest list glittered with the crème de la crème of high society: CEOs, foreign dignitaries, and a handful of Hollywood stars rumored to be on Bianca's secret payroll as brand ambassadors for her couture label. Just an hour before the ceremony, staff bustled around, finalizing last-minute touches. Servers in spotless uniforms balanced trays of chilled champagne, while the wedding planner, Atticus Montrose, darted about, barking discreet orders into his earpiece. Meanwhile, Alexander paced a secluded courtyard, his expression flickering between icy control and the shadow of dread. Beneath that polished exterior, a rising panic gnawed at him. Perfection. He demanded nothing less, but today felt tainted by something he couldn't name. His mother, Margaret Whitman, had quietly declined to attend the wedding, choosing instead to visit old friends in Vienna out of loyalty to Serena. Alexander hadn't expected the rest of his extended family to appear either. They openly disapproved of him rushing into this new marriage, while so many questions about the first remained unanswered. Yet the blow fate had planned for him wouldn't come from empty chairs, but from a figure he prayed never to face again. Upstairs in the estate's bridal suite, Bianca stood before an ornate vanity, carefully adjusting the diamond-studded tiara woven into her silky dark hair. Her mother, Lorraine Leclerc, fussed over the delicate lace sleeves of Bianca's gown. Her lipstick-red smile stretched wide with satisfaction as Bianca imagined the moment she would glide down the aisle. Very soon, she would no longer be simply Bianca Leclerc, but Bianca Whitman, wife to one of the richest men in the country. Unbeknownst to her, a storm loomed on the horizon, a storm poised to upend the Whitman legacy more violently than any hostile takeover or scandal ever could. The stage was set, each player fixed in place, and the curtain about to lift on a spectacle that no guest would ever forget. The midday sun crested high overhead, beams of light spilling through the towering oaks that lined the estate. Perfect rows of white chairs stretched across the lawn, forming a graceful path to the flower-draped altar under a sweeping silk canopy. Guests fanned themselves gently, leafing through the embossed wedding programs inscribed with Alexander and Bianca's names in looping gold script. In the background, a string quartet played a gentle melody that drifted like perfume across the garden. Alexander stood near the altar, exchanging quiet words with his longtime friend and occasional business partner. Daniel Grant was the one who had first introduced Alexander to Bianca, back when the notion of marrying someone else seemed absurd. Under normal circumstances, Daniel would have stood beside him as best man, but today he offered only a stiff smile whenever Alexander searched his eyes for reassurance. In Daniel's fleeting glances, Alexander could see the unspoken truth. His friend's support was forced, a fragile mask hiding the discomfort everyone was too polite to voice aloud. "Relax," Alexander muttered to himself, though his gaze kept darting toward the mansion's grand double doors. He wondered if Bianca was ready, if she had everything she needed, if she would look exactly as he imagined when she stepped out. In truth, he worried less about the ceremony and more about the chance that paparazzi or an unwanted face might slip past security. He had ordered tight protection, yet a creeping dread gnawed at him. He felt a cold sweat beneath his perfectly tailored collar, a phantom itch of doom that not even the fortress of wealth and hired guards could smother. Just a few feet away, Bianca's father, Philip Leclerc, tried to hide his discomfort. Though he welcomed Alexander's fortune and social standing, he couldn't pretend to be thrilled about giving his daughter away under such a cloud of rumors. The whole day felt like it balanced on the edge of scandal. Still, for Philip and his wife Lorraine, the truth was simple. They had faced mounting debts for years, and Bianca's marriage to Alexander promised the stability they desperately needed. So Philip adjusted his tie, drew a deep breath, and readied himself for his part. Inside the bridal suite, Bianca closed her eyes and drew in slow, steady breaths as her heart hammered in her chest. A storm of emotion raced through her, pride, triumph, and a thin thread of anxiety she couldn't quite tame. For a fleeting second, fear pricked at the back of her mind. What if Alexander faltered? What if her perfect stage crumbled before she could claim her crown? But she crushed the thought as quickly as it came. She studied her reflection in the tall mirror, pushing a confident smile onto her lips. "Today is my day," she reminded herself firmly. "My future is sealed." She lifted her cascading bouquet of white orchids, cast one last approving glance at her reflection, then nodded for her mother to call in the wedding planner. In the foyer, Atticus Montrose appeared with 2 assistants trailing behind him. "It's time," he said softly. The bridal party fell into line, the tiny flower girl and ring-bearer stepping forward with adorable seriousness. Outside, the gathered guests fell silent as the quartet shifted to the bridal processional. Bianca emerged through the open double doors, her arm resting lightly on her father's. Sunlight caught her gown, making the delicate beading shimmer like a trail of stars. A quiet gasp rippled through the seated crowd. Alexander stood taller, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Step by step, Bianca glided closer, her eyes locked onto his, and for a fleeting heartbeat, the world seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them beneath the silk canopy. Dr. Nancy Farnsworth, a trusted family friend who had officiated many Whitman weddings, welcomed them with a warm smile. The ceremony began with timeless vows, embroidered with personal anecdotes that painted the perfect illusion of an unbreakable love. Alexander slipped the brilliant diamond ring onto Bianca's finger. In that fleeting second, a surge of relief washed over him. This is it, he thought. Nothing can ruin this now. But fate had no intention of letting him off so easily. An unmistakable ripple ran through the hush of the crowd as a figure emerged at the far end of the aisle. Whispers erupted, heads turned sharply, and some guests rose from their seats, craning for a better look. A wave of disbelief and shock rolled through the gathering as they recognized the woman making her way forward. Serena Whitman, Alexander's estranged wife. Her hair was swept back into a simple chignon, and she wore a deep emerald silk dress that hugged her form. There was no hiding her pregnancy, just a few months along, but her rounded belly was plain for all to see. Gasps cut through the tense air. She moved with a steady, deliberate grace, her eyes locked on Alexander the entire time. His face drained of color, Bianca's bouquet shivered in her hands. Even Dr. Nancy Farnsworth faltered, her calm veneer slipping for a heartbeat as she took in the sight. Inside Alexander's chest, his heartbeat slammed against his ribs so violently it hurt. He felt every eye in that garden slice through his carefully built lies like knives. Serena's expression was unwavering, her hands resting calmly at her sides as she strode down the aisle, more like the rightful bride than the woman beside Alexander. Each step was a quiet thunderclap in a garden gone silent. When she reached the altar, she fixed her gaze on Alexander, and in a clear, steady voice, shattered the fragile hush. "I believe," she said, her words cutting through the heavy air, "there's something everyone here deserves to know before this farce goes any further." In that instant, the tension that had been coiling for months snapped like an overstretched wire. The confrontation Alexander had feared for so long was no longer a distant nightmare, but a merciless reality, raw and unstoppable. Every guest felt the gravity of what was unfolding. This wedding had just transformed into a public scandal, one they would never forget. The idyllic daydream of a flawless celebration evaporated, replaced by a brutal, uncomfortable reckoning. Serena stood tall and composed, but the fire in her eyes betrayed the storm raging inside her. She felt the weight of every betrayal, every lonely night, every lie swallowed just to protect her dignity, and now she was done protecting him. She wasn't here to beg or plead. She was here to strike a blow that would leave scars. Bianca's cheeks burned, her heartbeat roaring in her ears, her mind spinning on one desperate thought. How dare she come here? Simultaneously, a cold flicker of fear crept under her skin. She had done everything to ensure Serena stayed far away. Wasn't she supposed to be tucked away in Europe, hidden until this day was over? Alexander swallowed hard, his throat dry as dust. For a split second, he nearly broke. Wanted to run, wanted to lie, anything to stop this avalanche, but no words came. He fought to keep his expression neutral, but every second Serena stood there, pregnant and resolute, was a brutal reminder of how deeply he'd miscalculated. He finally found his voice, careful and controlled. "Serena," he said, "what are you doing here?" Serena glanced briefly at Bianca, then at the rows of stunned guests, before pinning Alexander with a look that made the hair on his neck stand up. "I'm here because I have something to say to you, to her, and to everyone willing to believe this ceremony means anything," she declared. Bianca bristled, struggling to seize back her composure. "This ceremony is legitimate," Bianca shot back, her voice trembling despite her attempt at bravado. "Alexander and I love each other. You walked away from him." "I never walked away," Serena countered, her eyes flashing with restrained fury. "I left to find my strength again, after discovering what the two of you were doing behind my back, and now I'm here to set the record straight." Dr. Nancy Farnsworth cleared her throat as if to intervene, but Serena raised a hand, her tone polite yet unyielding. "Not yet, Doctor. Let the bride and groom have their moment of truth first." Alexander's eyes darted around the garden. Desperate for an exit, but the heavy stares of Chicago's high society pinned him in place. His pulse thundered in his ears. There was no discreet escape, no graceful way out. "Whatever you have to say, say it," he finally muttered, his voice dropping into a ragged baritone. Serena drew a slow, steady breath. "Alexander and I are still legally married," she said, her tone clear and unwavering. "I never signed any divorce papers. I was never served any. And there's more." She rested a protective hand on her rounded belly. "This child is yours, Alexander, whether you want to accept it or not." The garden exploded with gasps. A few reporters who had slipped past security snapped photos and scribbled frantic notes. The scandal had landed, and it was colossal. Bianca stumbled back a step, her face draining of color. "She's lying," she hissed through clenched teeth. "She's just trying to destroy everything." Serena's gaze turned to steel. "Believe me, Bianca, ruining your day was never my goal. But I refuse to stand by and watch this lie play out any longer. Alexander, you tried to bury me, tried to shove me out of sight so you could rewrite your story. But I won't let you erase our marriage. Or this child." Alexander felt the ground tilt beneath him, as though the earth might open and devour him whole. He had counted on Serena's silence, had threatened, pleaded, offered hush money, done everything to keep her hidden. But nothing matched the iron will blazing in her eyes now. The guests shifted uneasily. Some exchanged horrified glances, while others were riveted, phones raised to record or live stream the unfolding catastrophe. Behind the last row of white chairs, Alexander's security detail hesitated, unsure whether to step in. Serena turned her focus to Bianca, her calm voice razor-sharp with tension. "You can drape yourself in a white dress, carry a $1,000 bouquet, and recite all the vows you want. But none of that will ever change the fact that Alexander Whitman is still my husband." Bianca's eyes glittered with raw fury. "If you'd been the wife he needed, maybe this wouldn't have happened," Bianca snapped. "You think you can just waltz in here and—" Before she could finish, Serena took a firm step forward and, in one swift motion, slapped Alexander across the face. The sharp crack cut through the garden like a gunshot. Alexander froze, stunned, a red mark blooming on his cheekbone. It was final, an exclamation point to months of buried betrayal and secrets dragged into daylight. The entire gathering gasped, even Bianca recoiled, her outrage momentarily overshadowed by disbelief. No one had expected Serena to shatter her calm so publicly. Alexander lifted his hand to his cheek, his eyes wide, searching the stunned faces for something: sympathy, control, anything. He tried to speak but found only silence in his throat. In all his ruthless life, no business rival, no boardroom coup had ever humiliated him like this, especially not his own wife. A raw panic twisted in his gut, mocking every illusion of invincibility he had ever cultivated. For the first time in years, he had no plan, no spin, no leverage, only the burn of Serena's palm and 100 eyes feasting on his downfall. Serena turned to face the hundreds of watchful eyes, her voice trembling with righteous fury. "You all came here to witness a wedding," she said, her tone clear despite the tremor in it. "But instead, I hope you remember this moment for what it truly is. The truth about a man willing to throw away his wife and his unborn child for ambition and convenience. This ceremony is a lie. And as for me," her gaze swept the crowd, unwavering, "I will not be erased." She pivoted smoothly, her eyes scanning the aisle, lined with shocked faces. The hush that fell was so deep that only the soft, confused notes of the string quartet lingered in the background, uncertain whether to stop or continue. With the same fierce poise she'd carried in, Serena turned on her heel and walked back up the aisle, the crowd splitting silently to let her pass. As the final strains of the processional faded, everyone present understood that the Whitman family's illusion of perfection had just been shattered beyond repair. A bride left standing alone at the altar, a groom stunned, cheek burning with shame, and a wife who walked away carrying the rightful heir to it all. For a heartbeat, time seemed to freeze in the wake of Serena's departure. Guests remained motionless in their seats, torn between gawking and fleeing. Bianca, her face a pale storm of humiliation and rage, rounded on Alexander, her voice low enough that only he and a few horrified onlookers could hear. "Well?" she hissed, each word trembling. "Do something." Alexander drew a ragged breath, the sting on his cheek throbbing as sharply inside as out. Beneath the pain, humiliation pooled in his chest like poison. No amount of wealth could buy back this lost control. He lifted a hand to calm her, but Bianca smacked it aside. Stepping so close, he could see the veins pulsing at her temple. "Don't you dare shush me," she spat, her teeth bared in fury. "Your wife, your pregnant wife, just humiliated me in front of everyone." With the weight of dozens of eyes burning into him, Alexander forced himself to stand tall. He cleared his throat, but when he finally spoke, his voice betrayed him. Unsteady, stripped of its usual authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice cracking under the weight of too many eyes. I apologize for this disturbance. Perhaps it's best we reconvene inside for a moment and handle matters privately. The ceremony is temporarily on hold." Those words rippled through the garden like an electric pulse. Guests exchanged startled glances. Some quietly rose from their chairs and drifted away in murmured clusters, heading toward the grand ballroom to await whatever came next. Meanwhile, Bianca stomped down the short marble steps, her gown trailing behind her like a storm cloud, with her father, Philip, and mother, Lorraine, hurrying after her. Daniel Grant approached Alexander, laying a firm, sympathetic hand on his friend's shoulder. "You need to get in front of this," Daniel muttered urgently. "The press is going to tear you apart. This is bigger than gossip columns, Alex." Alexander's eyes, once sharp with certainty, now looked hollow, dulled by shock and the sting on his cheek. "I know," he rasped, pressing his fingertips to his temples. I never thought she'd do this. Serena was always so passive." A calm voice joined in from behind them. It was Susan Farnsworth, Dr. Farnsworth's younger sister, and a familiar face in the Whitman family's inner circle. She shook her head, her eyes sympathetic but not surprised. "Serena was never one for scenes. If she did this, you must have pushed her too far, Alex." Alexander swallowed the retort that nearly escaped his lips. Deep down, he knew she was right. The threats, the dismissals, the manipulative half-promises, he'd forced Serena into a corner for too long. Today, she had decided she would not stay quiet. Now with her pregnancy exposed, the fallout would be catastrophic. The board of directors at Whitman Holdings would be outraged, his mother would be crushed. And the Whitman name, already scrutinized by the press, now teetered on the brink of ruin. Dr. Nancy Farnsworth stepped in, her hand light on Alexander's arm. Her glasses had slipped slightly down her nose as she peered at him over the rims. "Would you like me to make an announcement? Formally postpone the ceremony and guide everyone to the reception hall?" Yes, please," Alexander croaked, his throat dry as dust. "This is a family matter now. I need to speak to Bianca alone, and maybe even Serena, if she hasn't left yet." Dr. Farnsworth gave a gentle nod and moved toward the microphone stand near the altar, clearing her throat delicately to regain the crowd's attention. Meanwhile, Alexander and Daniel turned on their heels, striding into the mansion's opulent foyer in search of Bianca. Inside, the Whitman estate's interior was a dazzling blur of marble floors, gold-framed mirrors, and panicked staff. Caterers and planners darted past with trays and floral arrangements, whispering anxiously about whether to continue prepping the reception or start packing it all away. Atticus Montrose, headset still clipped to his collar, appeared out of nowhere. The wedding planner looked as though he might burst into tears. His dream of executing the most talked-about wedding of the decade was crumbling in slow motion. Alexander found Bianca standing rigidly near a grand marble fireplace, the hem of her gown dramatically fanned out like a fortress around her. Her parents hovered close by, silent, mortified statues with cheeks flushed red. When Alexander entered, Bianca's eyes snapped to him, blazing with betrayal and rage. "How could you not tell me she was pregnant?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "When you said there were a few loose ends with Serena, I never imagined that meant a baby, Alexander. A baby?" Alexander tried to keep his voice steady, but the tension wound it tight. "I didn't know," he nearly shouted, hands balling into fists. "She never told me she was carrying my child. Yes, I suspected, but then she vanished. Every time I tried to reach her." "Contact her?" Bianca cut in, her tone a blade. "You told me you were just finalizing divorce papers. You swore there was no chance of her reappearing in your life. None." Her voice cracked again, but this time the rage was stitched with raw heartbreak, a betrayal she couldn't mask, no matter how sharp her words. Daniel stepped between them, arms raised to broker some semblance of peace. Both of you, stop, this isn't helping. We need a plan, not a screaming match. He shot Alexander a look sharp enough to cut stone. Do you understand how bad this is? Serena's pregnant. She's still your legal wife. If you marry Bianca now, you risk bigamy charges on top of this public mess. Philip Leclerc, Bianca's father, rubbed his temples as if trying to massage the disaster away. The press will destroy us all. This wedding has become a spectacle. Our name, your name. What about me? Bianca exploded, rounding on her father before turning the full force of her fury back to Alexander. My career? My reputation? This marriage that might not even be valid now. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears now, fury and fear colliding until they left her breathless with indignation. Alexander shut his eyes for a long, breathless moment, suffocated by the chaos of his own making. When he spoke again, his tone was forced calm, like a drowning man pretending to swim. All right, he said. We'll salvage what we can. We postpone the ceremony. Tell the guests it's a family emergency, some misunderstanding. Daniel, get our PR team on the line. We need a statement drafted within the hour. A statement? Bianca scoffed, folding her arms so tightly her knuckles whitened. You can't just spin this away with a press release. Your pregnant wife just humiliated us in front of the entire city. The entire world knows now, Alexander. His eyes dropped to the polished floor. He knew she was right. No wealth or power could sweep away the image of Serena standing in front of hundreds of witnesses, her pregnancy undeniable. No carefully crafted story would bury that. He felt the truth like a stone lodged in his throat. This was the first battle he couldn't win with spin, threats, or bank accounts. What gnawed at him even more was the urgent need to speak with Serena. Why had she chosen to appear now, so boldly, after staying hidden for so long? Was she going to blackmail him for more money? Or was she simply done being invisible? He dragged a hand through his hair, pulling free the last traces of its perfect styling, feeling the entire empire he'd built tremble on the edge of collapse. Let me think, Alexander murmured again, his voice hollow and spent. I need some air. I'll be back. Without waiting for anyone to reply, he turned sharply and strode out of the drawing room, leaving Bianca, Daniel, and the Leclercs behind in suffocating silence. He moved through the mansion's echoing corridors until he found himself in a small stone courtyard tucked behind sculpted hedges. At its center, a weathered marble fountain gurgled softly, stone cherubs spilling water in a lullaby that mocked the storm inside his head. Alexander had forged an empire with sheer cunning and brute ambition. Yet here, in the fragile realm of human connection, he was exposed as a fraud. The very empire he'd built to prove he was untouchable now felt like a paper shield against the raw truth of a child he'd never planned and a woman he'd cast aside. From inside the house drifted muted voices and the shuffle of restless guests, but out here he closed his eyes and shut it all out. The ghost of his unborn child loomed over him, more real than any signed deal or sealed contract. Was there regret? Maybe. But overshadowing any remorse was the question clawing at his mind. How could he possibly regain control of this disaster? He sank onto a wrought iron bench beside the fountain, the quiet splash of water easing him into a brutal reflection. Images flickered through his mind, relentless as headlines, snapshots of choices that had brought him here. He remembered the night he first met Serena Vandermark at a charity gala 5 years ago. She'd worn a silvery gown that caught the chandelier light, her poise and warmth an antidote to the jaded socialites orbiting the city's elite. She spoke with a quiet fire about her work funding children's health programs. Alexander, who'd long grown cynical toward every trust fund beauty-chasing status, found himself captivated by Serena's earnestness. They danced. They laughed. By the end of the night, he was promising to call her before his car even arrived. Their courtship was a fever dream. Moonlit dinners in Paris, sun-soaked yacht cruises along the Amalfi Coast, stolen hours whispering about hopes too delicate to survive the harsh daylight. He had once believed, with reckless certainty, that Serena would be his salvation from the cold emptiness that drove him. For a while, she was. Serena was everything he hadn't known he craved. Soft-spoken but unwavering, compassionate, yet fiercely principled. Where Alexander saw numbers and leverage, Serena saw people, pushing him to use his power to do something more than just make money. When he proposed, it was during a private dinner at the summit of the Eiffel Tower. She'd cried when she said yes. In those early years, they'd been truly happy. They filled the Whitman estate with laughter and parties that lit up Chicago's gossip pages. They traveled the world together, dreaming aloud of a family. But as Alexander's business empire expanded, so did the distance between them. He was more at home in boardrooms than their bedroom. The arguments began, first quiet, then slamming doors and 3 a.m. shouting. He'd chosen profit over peace, power over promises, each betrayal cutting deeper than the last until love soured into resentment on both sides. She told him he was losing his soul for profit. He told her she was naive about how real power worked. Into this widening fracture stepped Bianca Leclerc, bold, hungry for more, shamelessly materialistic. She mirrored all of Alexander's darker appetites. The first time they met was at a champagne-soaked launch party for her couture label. The spark was instant, dangerously so. The charge between them, Alexander and Bianca, had been too potent to resist. The electricity of shared ambition of wanting more burned so hot it eclipsed everything else. Serena, sensing the widening gulf, had tried to pull their marriage back from the brink. He could still see her face that morning she confronted him, tears carving paths down her cheeks. "I know about her," she said softly. "Why, Alexander? Why can't you just talk to me?" His answer had been ice, cold denial, dismissive lies wrapped in arrogance. Deep down, even as the words left his mouth, he'd hated himself for it. But pride was a poison he drank willingly, convinced he could control the fallout. After that day, Serena had shut down. She smiled less and less until she didn't smile at all. Eventually, she packed a small suitcase and told him she needed space. "Europe," she said, "maybe for a few weeks." He let her go, even arranged every comfort, telling himself it was cleaner if she slipped away quietly. He never imagined she would come back, never imagined she would be pregnant, and certainly never imagined she would bring it all crashing down at his wedding to Bianca. But here he was, an empire at stake and a scandal so big even he couldn't buy silence. A faint rustle snapped him out of his reverie. Alexander opened his eyes to find Daniel Grant standing by the hedges, phone in hand. "Alex," Daniel said softly, glancing around to be sure they were alone. "I've spoken to the PR team. They're drafting a statement, wedding postponed due to unforeseen personal matters. That work for you?" Alexander nodded stiffly. "Yes. Do it." He hesitated. "Has anyone seen Serena?" Daniel's expression darkened. "She left, drove off in a black town car, took the west exit. Staff says she didn't look back. If you hurry, maybe you can catch her, but honestly, she didn't look like she planned to stick around." A cold panic fluttered beneath Alexander's ribs. Serena was out there, carrying his child, and for the first time in his carefully managed life, he had no script to follow, no contract to sign to make her stay. A hollow ache spread through Alexander's chest. For all the power he wielded, he suddenly felt clueless about how to fix this. "So she's gone," he murmured. "And Bianca's furious," Daniel added, voice low. "She's still in the drawing room with her parents. They're demanding some sort of plan before more guests bolt. Alex, we need to get ahead of this. Either salvage it with Bianca now or figure out how to handle Serena's bombshell. You can't do both." Alexander pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes, a sharp headache pulsing at his temples. Publicly acknowledging Serena's pregnancy would turn the gossip pages into feeding frenzies. Denying it, if proven true, would obliterate whatever reputation he had left. For once, power and strategy were nothing but brittle armor cracking under a single truth. He was the man who broke everything. "Just give me a few more minutes," he muttered, forcing a ragged breath. "Keep them calm, please." Daniel nodded and headed back toward the mansion to play peacemaker. Alone again, Alexander turned his weary gaze back to the fountain, its steady trickle mocking him with a calm he could no longer remember how to feel. Again, a single memory bubbled to the surface. Serena laughing beside him at a charity gala, her fingers resting lightly on his arm, her eyes bright with genuine warmth. It struck Alexander, with a cruel pang, that once upon a time, love had been the reason for everything. Somewhere along the way, money, power, and the lust for control had suffocated that reason, leaving him now at the brink of losing everything that had ever truly mattered. A hot knot of shame twisted in his gut. He could almost hear Serena's laughter echoing off the marble walls of this empty house, mocking him for the man he'd become. The thought that he might be a father rattled him to his bones. He pictured a child with Serena's kind eyes, or maybe his own unyielding jawline. Fear, guilt, a flicker of awe, emotions slammed together inside his chest, suffocating him. If he turned his back on Serena and this baby, would he ever find peace? And what about Bianca, whose fierce ambition matched his own hunger for power? His once unshakable world had splintered. No path forward came without ruin. A bitter divorce, a media circus, or a vicious custody battle that would drag the Whitman name through every tabloid on both coasts. For all his billions, Alexander felt powerless for the first time in decades. The same ruthless mind that could outwit Fortune 500 CEOs now stumbled over a simple human truth. He had broken trust in every direction. There was no quick fix for that. He rose from the iron bench, brushing off his jacket with mechanical precision. Outside, the guests might be drifting away, but this day was far from finished. What came next would shape his future, personally and in the cold eyes of the world. Would he run after Serena, ready to claim his responsibility? Or would he double down on Bianca, trying desperately to salvage the empire he had bled for? Steeling himself, Alexander re-entered the mansion, moving through polished corridors with grim purpose. He found Bianca in the same drawing room, perched rigidly on a velvet chaise. Her perfect gown spilled across the floor in a river of silk, but her face was anything but bridal calm. Her parents, Philip and Lorraine Leclerc, flanked her, worry and simmering rage etched deep into their features. Bianca's eyes snapped to him the second he crossed the threshold, fury blazing, undimmed, maybe sharper than before. "I was about to come looking for you," she said, her tone clipped and sharp as broken glass. "We need to talk." Alexander's throat tightened, but he managed a nod. "Yes, we do." Daniel Grant lingered in the doorway, reading the tension like a seasoned broker reading a stock ticker before a crash. Silently, he slipped out, easing the doors shut behind him to grant privacy. Philip and Lorraine started to follow him out, but Bianca flicked her fingers, stopping them. "I'm not doing this alone," she snapped, her eyes pinning Alexander in place. "Stay." Alexander cleared his throat, fighting to keep his voice even. "I understand, Bianca. None of this chaos was ever meant to happen." The word felt pathetic even to his own ears. Chaos couldn't begin to describe the wreckage he'd unleashed on everyone in this room. "Chaos?" Bianca laughed, the sound cold and humorless. "You're still married, Alexander, and your wife, your pregnant wife, walked right into our wedding." Lorraine spoke then, her voice cutting through the heavy air like an icy blade. "Alexander, how could you let this day go forward if there was any chance Serena would reappear? You've humiliated Bianca and us." Philip folded his arms, his posture rigid with restrained disgust. "We trusted you, Alex. We gave you our daughter's future." "Alexander, despite everything, this isn't just some small misunderstanding. This wedding is in ruins," Philip said, his voice hard with restrained anger. Alexander raised a hand, trying to steady the rising storm. "I didn't know Serena would come back. She left months ago, cut off all contact. I tried to finalize the divorce, but she wouldn't respond. My lawyers were handling it, but then she disappeared. I didn't know she was pregnant." Bianca's lip quivered, fury flickering into raw heartbreak. "So you planned to stand at that altar with me while still legally married? Did you really think a court paper was just a trivial formality we'd fix later?" Alexander's eyes dropped to the intricate rug beneath his polished shoes. "I told myself it would be handled quietly. I never imagined she'd appear like this." His throat burned with the taste of every lie he'd fed himself, how simple it had seemed to erase a marriage with money and signatures, never imagining the cost. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Beyond the closed doors, muted echoes of bewildered guests drifted in like an accusation. At last, Bianca spoke, her voice shaking. "What do you expect me to do now? My name, my label. Everything is at stake. Now I'm branded as the other woman who tried to steal a married man. Do you have any idea how vicious the tabloids will be, Alexander?" He exhaled shakily, searching for words that might calm the tidal wave threatening to drown him. "We can manage the press, Bianca. My PR team is exceptional. We'll release statements, say the wedding was postponed because of a private emergency. They'll handle it." Bianca cut him off with a sharp laugh, brittle as glass. And Serena? What's your plan for her? You think you can ignore her pregnancy? Deny that child is yours. The question hit him square in the gut. For all his polished spin and carefully controlled statements, the truth stared him down. There was a baby, his baby. This wasn't a PR crisis, it was a living consequence he could not buy away. A wave of something raw, fear or maybe shame, ripped through him, stronger than any boardroom threat he'd ever faced. No, he whispered hoarse. I can't deny that child. If it's mine, I have to do right by it. Philip's scowl deepened, arms crossed over his chest. Then what about Bianca? You intend to discard her now because your wife is carrying your child? Alexander closed his eyes, dragging a hand through his hair, destroying what remained of his perfect style. I don't have all the answers, Philip. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us. Bianca, you know how much I care about you. She shot to her feet, towering over him even in her wedding heels, her gown pooling like storm clouds at her feet. Do I? Because from where I stand, the man I trusted just humiliated me in front of everyone by letting his pregnant wife hijack our wedding. Bianca, he started, but Peter's sharp voice cut him off like a blade. Enough, Philip barked. This is not the time for sweet words. We need to think about the legal fallout. Our families have legacies to protect. Lorraine nodded, her expression stone cold. Indeed, what's to stop Serena from demanding an obscene settlement or dragging us all into an ugly paternity suit that will headline every gossip site from New York to LA? A hurricane of dread churned in Alexander's chest. He had built his empire on controlling narratives, forging backroom deals, and buying loyalty. But here, right now, none of it seemed enough to buy him out of this mess. This was no boardroom deal. This was raw, personal, and tangled up with the very core of who Alexander was. He stepped closer and grasped Bianca's trembling hands in his. Listen to me, he said softly but firmly. I know you feel betrayed and furious. I swear to you, I will fix this. We'll deal with whatever legal mess comes up, but we can't turn on each other now. We have to stand together. She stared at him, eyes glossy under thick, smudged mascara. I gave up everything for you, she whispered, voice catching. I staked my future, my reputation, my entire name on you. If you go back to her now, if you choose your wife over me, what am I left with? Her words sliced deeper than any lawsuit or public scandal. For a breathless second, Alexander hated himself more than he thought possible, seeing in Bianca's eyes the ruin he'd made of two women's lives. Her quiet desperation struck him harder than any press headline. Beneath all her ambition and iron poise, Bianca did love him, maybe in her own sharp-edged way. I don't want to lose you, he murmured, but I owe it to myself and to that child, to talk to Serena, to find out what she wants. If she only wants financial support, then fine, I'll provide that. Maybe we can still move forward, but it's going to take time. Bianca pulled her hands away, her face hardening into a mask of control. I'm not waiting forever, Alexander. I will not be your backup plan. You have 1 week to decide. After that, I'll know you've chosen Serena and her child. Her voice didn't shake this time. It was steel under silk, the voice of a woman who refused to be disposable ever again. 1 week? Lorraine gasped, her voice tight. Darling, that's barely any time. Bianca turned to her mother, her tone unyielding. I have to protect myself. I won't be strung along ever again. Alexander's jaw flexed, but he gave a stiff nod. All right, 1 week. I'll reach Serena. I'll figure out what she wants. Meanwhile, I'll arrange a safe, quiet place for you, away from the press. My security team will handle it. Philip and Lorraine exchanged uneasy looks but didn't object. Bianca gave a single curt nod. Good. But remember, Alexander, this scandal could break us or it could make us stronger. It all depends on what you decide. With that, Bianca and her parents swept from the drawing room, leaving the air heavy with her ultimatum. A single week. 7 days to choose between the mother of his unborn child and the woman he had sworn to marry. The clock was already ticking. 2 days later, the Whitman estate was unnaturally silent. Guests had vanished. Florists had packed away the last white rose. The circus of paparazzi had shifted their claws to tabloid headlines and anonymous blog leaks. Every glossy cover screamed the same truth. Billionaire groom exposed. Pregnant wife crashes lavish wedding. Alexander couldn't bear to look at it. He had barricaded himself in his study, A grand room lined with dark walnut shelves stuffed with leather-bound volumes on business strategy, world history, and first-edition classics he never actually read anymore. Heavy drapes blocked out the sunlight, and a lone desk lamp cast its pool of light over the chaos before him. Legal drafts, frantic PR statements, and a half-written letter to Serena. He had called, texted, emailed, no answer. Serena had vanished again, but this time, she had all the leverage, and Alexander knew it. She had vanished as swiftly as she had appeared. The only concrete lead Alexander had was an address for a Manhattan townhouse, forwarded by Serena's lawyer, presumably for sending legal documents. Whether she was actually living there, he couldn't be sure, but it was all he had. A soft knock at the study door snapped him out of his thoughts. "Come in," he called. Daniel Grant stepped inside, coat draped over one arm, his expression pinched with concern. "Any word?" Alexander asked, though the slump of his shoulders betrayed how little hope he had left. Daniel shook his head. "Nothing. She's avoiding all direct contact, but—" He held up a hand before Alexander could interrupt. "I did reach out to an old friend of hers, Marilyn Harris. She used to work with Serena on charity boards. Marilyn says Serena is in New York but doesn't know the exact address." Alexander rubbed a hand over his brow, the beginning of a headache pulsing behind his eyes. "I just need to talk to her. If I can get her to sit down, listen to reason, maybe we can avoid more damage. No more headlines, no lawsuits." Daniel sighed, dropping into the leather armchair opposite the desk. "Alex, from her point of view, the public embarrassment already happened. She walked into that wedding to blow everything up. She's using that baby as both armor and a blade." A muscle twitched in Alexander's jaw. "You think she wants revenge? Or a bigger payout?" "Maybe," Daniel said carefully. "Or maybe she just wants you to acknowledge her. And the baby. You did push her aside." A flicker of shame rippled through Alexander. He pulled open a drawer, retrieving the sonogram Serena's lawyer had included with a single-line note. He stared at the grainy black-and-white shape, blurry but unmistakably real. "This changes everything," he murmured, tracing a finger along the edge of the ultrasound. "I never even wanted kids, but knowing one's coming, it's a lot." Daniel stood and leaned over the desk. "You have to ask yourself, do you see a life with Serena and this baby?" Alexander exhaled slowly, setting the sonogram down like it weighed 100 pounds. "We were happy once, but so much damage has been done. The betrayal, the lies. And then there's Bianca. If I walk away from her, she'll go nuclear. She's threatened to drag every dirty secret she has into the press if I abandon her." Daniel nodded grimly. "Bianca doesn't forgive. She either stays loyal or she burns it all down." Outside the study window, a steel-gray winter sky hung heavy over Chicago, echoing the cold knot in Alexander's chest. He felt pinned in place by guilt, scandal, and every selfish choice he'd ever made. "I need to see Serena face to face," he said at last, voice hardening with resolve. "If she won't take my calls, I'll go to Manhattan and find her myself." Daniel gave a short nod. "Then that's what we'll do." "That might be better, but be careful. The paparazzi are circling, just waiting for a fresh scandal to feed on," Daniel warned. Alexander stood up, shrugging into his overcoat from the back of the leather chair. "I'll take an unmarked car. Send a security team, but tell them to hang back, far enough not to draw attention. If I'm not back by tonight, tell Bianca I'm handling things." A flicker of approval softened the tension in Daniel's eyes. "Just be honest with her, Alex. She deserves at least that, no matter what happens." Alexander left the Whitman estate with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Hardly a perfect disguise, but enough to keep prying lenses at bay in the bustling Manhattan streets. He moved with practiced purpose, weaving through pedestrians, eyes flicking to building numbers until he found the townhouse address Serena's lawyer had provided. He paused at the steps, his pulse hammering against his ribs. Drawing a shaky breath, he pressed the doorbell. His breath ghosted in the winter air as seconds dragged by. No answer. He rang again, jaw tightening. Finally, the door cracked open, revealing an older woman's face, kind but edged with suspicion. "Yes, I'm looking for Serena Whitman," he said quietly. "Is she here?" Her eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Alexander Whitman," he said, clearing his throat. "Her husband." She studied him a heartbeat longer before opening the door wider. "Come in." She led him into a modest but warm foyer, tasteful painting, soft lighting, worlds away from the marble coldness of his mansion. "My name's Beth. I'm a friend of Serena's from church." Alexander's eyes darted across the quiet room, noting the faint scent of lavender and the simple, calm order that felt so distinctly Serena. "Where is she?" he asked. Beth pressed her lips together, resting. "This pregnancy hasn't been easy, especially with the circus you've stirred up." A blade of guilt cut deep in his chest. "May I see her?" Beth motioned for him to wait and slipped into a back room. Minutes crawled by. Then Serena appeared in the doorway, wearing a loose cardigan that did little to hide the gentle curve of her belly. She eyed Alexander with guarded exhaustion. He swallowed hard. "Serena?" She said nothing at first, arms folding over her stomach like a fortress. When she did speak, her voice was soft but unyielding. "What do you want, Alexander?" He took a step closer, hesitant. "I want to talk. About us. About the baby. About what happened at the wedding." She let out a short, humorless laugh that barely rose above a sigh. "That wasn't a wedding, Alexander. That was a spectacle. A catastrophe." He nodded, taking her bitterness without flinching. "You're right. I deserved that slap, and probably a lot worse. But I came here because I want to see if there's a way forward. A way to be there for this child without destroying everyone in the process." Serena's eyes shone with unshed tears. Her voice trembled, but the steel in it didn't waver. "You don't get to walk in now and play the peacemaker, Alexander. You ignored me for months. You threatened to drag me to court if I didn't quietly sign divorce papers, and the whole time you were planning a wedding with her." His shoulders slumped, the fight bleeding out of him. "I was reckless, blinded by ambition and lust. I hurt you in ways I never meant to." The words tasted like poison, but he forced himself to choke them out, knowing they were years overdue. Serena brushed a tear from her cheek, her hand shaking just slightly. "You did, and I'll never forget it. But this baby? This baby is my future, Alexander. I won't let anyone, least of all you, compromise that." He reached out, tentatively wrapping his hand around hers. She stiffened but didn't pull away. "I want to be part of this child's life," he said, voice thick and raw. She searched his face as if testing every word for truth. In that moment he wished he could pour every regret, every unsaid apology straight into her trembling palm. "Then choose," she whispered, "Bianca or me, because I won't raise my child in a circus with a father who's only half invested." His chest squeezed painfully as Bianca's ultimatum echoed in his head too. He had just 5 days left on that deadline. 2 ultimatums, each demanding all of him. Serena gently tugged her hand free. "I'm not asking for an answer this second. But if you really care about this baby, prove it. Not with promises, actions." He nodded slowly, tears stinging at the edges of his eyes. For the first time in his calculated, unstoppable life, Alexander Whitman felt stripped of every shield. Here in this modest Manhattan townhouse, facing the truth of a child he never planned for, and the woman he'd once sworn to cherish, he knew. No boardroom conquest could define him the way this choice would. 4 more days crawled by, each heavy with dread and the weight of all he stood to lose. Alexander barricaded himself inside the Whitman estate, avoiding the paparazzi swarming the gates like vultures. He spent sleepless nights on marathon calls with lawyers, chasing settlements that might somehow buy back a piece of calm, but nothing felt right. Meanwhile, Bianca secluded herself in the luxury Upper East Side penthouse he'd arranged for her. She refused to see him in person, allowing only clipped phone calls, most ending in searing arguments or tense silence. Her deadline stood unyielding. 1 week from the day everything fell apart. And as the clock bled down to days, then hours, Alexander saw with brutal clarity that this wasn't just about love or scandal anymore. It was about the kind of man he truly was, and the life he would have to live once the world saw him stripped of every polished mask. He had never faced a crisis that demanded moral conviction over strategic cunning. But now, cunning meant nothing without integrity to back it up. On the 7th day, Alexander sat behind the massive mahogany desk in his study, hands trembling as they hovered over stacks of untouched paperwork. The phone rang, a sharp, final sound in the stillness, and he answered it with resigned exhaustion. "It's me," Bianca said. Her voice was taut, every word strained to hold back a storm of emotion. "It's been a week, Alexander. I want your answer. Are you choosing me or her?" He closed his eyes, pain threading through every syllable. Bianca, he began softly. I've thought about this every waking hour. I'm so sorry I dragged you into this mess. You deserved so much better than what I gave you. She said nothing, the silence on the line suffocating. Serena is my wife, he continued, voice breaking, and there's a child. My child. I can't abandon them. A frozen silence settled between them. Then her voice came back, trembling with fury. So you've chosen her. It's not about choosing her, Alexander said, his throat tight with the weight of truth. It's about doing what's right for my child, for my family. I don't know if Serena will ever forgive me. I don't even know if we can fix what's broken, but my child deserves a father. I can't run from that. A bitter laugh crackled through the phone, sharp enough to cut him open. Your child deserves a father. I deserved a husband, a wedding, a future, Alexander. You robbed me of every bit of that. He swallowed, powerless to mend the damage. I'll take care of you, financially, anything you need. Money, she snapped, her disgust palpable even across miles. That's all you know how to give. Keep your blood money, Alexander. I don't want your pity or your hush money. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was a cold promise. If you think you'll stroll back into society with your perfect little family like none of this happened, think again. I'm going to tell the world everything. The Whitman name will be poison when I'm done. He stared at the glossy surface of his desk, her words echoing like thunder in a tomb. Do what you must, he said quietly. I deserve whatever comes. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. I never thought I'd live to see the day you'd pick moral duty over ambition. Congratulations on your big awakening, Alexander. Then the line went dead, leaving only the dial tone ringing in his ear. He lowered the phone and exhaled, unsteady but lighter in a way he hadn't felt in years. Regret coursed through him in waves, piercing, relentless, but beneath it was a fragile ember of relief. He had finally made a choice that aligned with something deeper than greed or public image. For the next hour, he wandered the Whitman estate in a haze, ignoring the relentless ping of texts and calls from the outside world. Then, driven by something solid in his chest at last, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. He told his driver to take him straight to the Manhattan townhouse. When he arrived, he knocked with a new steadiness in his veins. Beth opened the door, her expression cautious but not unkind. She studied him for a heartbeat, then stepped aside. Alexander found Serena in the living room, curled on the couch with a book balanced on her lap. At the sight of him she stiffened, her brow furrowing with weary skepticism. I've made my choice, Alexander said, his hands trembling faintly. Bianca and I are done. I can't promise we'll fix everything between us, Serena, but I swear I'll be here, for you and for the baby, whatever you decide you need from me. She studied his face, scanning for any trace of his old slick lies. At last, she asked quietly, and what if I still decide to divorce you? Alexander nodded slowly, accepting the sting. Then I'll respect that. But divorced or not, I want to be part of our child's life. I'll provide for you both. Do everything I can to be a real father. A choked sob escaped her throat, tears gathering in her eyes. Why couldn't you see this before? Why did you have to destroy everything just to feed your own ego? He stepped forward carefully, lowering himself onto the edge of a chair across from her, keeping his distance, but trying to bridge the space anyway. I was blinded by ambition, by the fantasy that I could have it all. Power, wealth, love, on my own terms. I see now how wrong I was. The confession felt like ripping open old wounds, but it was the only truth left he still owned. She wiped at her tears with the back of her hand. Actions speak louder than words, Alexander. And so far, your actions have been selfish. If you want to stay, prove you've changed. He nodded, his voice low and solemn. I understand. I'll give up controlling stakes in a few projects. I'll step back from the constant chase. I'll be here more where I should have been all along. We can do counseling if you want. Or if you'd rather I keep my distance but stay supportive. I'll do that too. Just let me show you I can be better. In his chest, a fragile hope bloomed, one he didn't dare name yet, but which felt more real than any million-dollar deal he'd ever closed. Serena watched him for a long, searching moment, anger and hurt still swirling beneath the surface, but maybe, just maybe, the faintest spark of hope flickering behind her eyes. Finally, she set aside her book, folded her hands in her lap, and said quietly, We'll start with the basics: doctor's appointments, schedules, real communication. If you can handle that, maybe, just maybe, there's a chance. Relief crashed through Alexander like a wave, sharp but tempered by the truth that this was just the first step in a long, uphill climb toward forgiveness. "That's all I ask," he whispered. "A chance." She exhaled slowly, one hand coming to rest protectively over her belly. "We'll see. For now, that's enough." Outside, the city buzzed on, unaware of the fragile truce being formed inside this small Manhattan townhouse. Alexander looked at Serena, his chest tightening with a mix of remorse and a fragile resolve he hadn't felt in years. He knew rebuilding what he'd broken, if it could even be rebuilt, would take time. But for once in his life, time was something he was ready to spend unselfishly on another human being. The Whitman name might never fully recover. Bianca would likely drag him through the mud in the press. The tabloids would gorge on every ugly detail. But none of it weighed as much as the small life he'd chosen to protect, the life growing inside Serena. This was his second chance, maybe his last, to be more than just a billionaire with a tarnished legacy. It was his chance to be a father, and, if fate allowed, a husband worthy of the word. A turbulent journey ended with one choice, a choice that shattered old illusions and laid the foundation for a new path, one built on remorse, humility, and the fragile promise of redemption. The road ahead for Alexander and Serena would be far from smooth. Old wounds would ache, new challenges would come, but beneath the scandal, betrayal, and broken vows, a glimmer of hope remained, for the sake of the child soon to arrive. So the story is over. Our wonderful friends, are you still here at this hour? If you're still with me right now, then something in Alexander's messy, painful, and raw journey must be echoing inside you too. Let's sit with that for a moment, just you and me. Maybe this story isn't just about a billionaire's downfall or a scandal splashed across tabloids. Maybe it's about something all of us feel, but sometimes refuse to admit. The cost of ignoring what truly matters while chasing what we think we deserve. Alexander's greatest mistake wasn't loving the wrong woman. It was believing that love, family, and loyalty could wait while he conquered the world. There's a line by Rumi that fits here. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Alexander's empire didn't teach him this. His failure did. It's easy to protect our pride until it costs us everything real. The touch of a partner's hand, the laughter of a child yet to be born, the calm that comes from knowing we are truly seen. Maybe you, reading this now, have your own version of Serena, someone or something you've put off for later, while you chase tomorrow's goals. What if tonight you gave that part of your life the honesty and presence it deserves? The road to healing is jagged. Alexander's story reminds us that no apology fixes everything overnight. But it's a start. And sometimes a start is enough to change a whole life. So if you felt something in this tale, if it made you think about your own choices, your own family, your own chance to choose love over ego, then I invite you to hold that close tonight. And tomorrow, do one thing that proves you've heard the lesson. Real love is built in actions, not promises. If this resonated with you, please hit that like, share this story with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us all how fragile, stubborn, and beautiful the human heart can be. Thank you for staying till the very end. You matter more than you know.